Hello, everyone. Good evening to all of you all, and a big hello to all those joining us from different parts of the world. It's a day before the D-Day when the results of the 2024 Indian general elections are out, and this is a pivotal moment for the world's largest democracy with far-fetching implications for the global community. In Delhi, the national capital of India, from where we are hosting the webinar, I confirm that the curiosity has taken over the air, with ballots set to be counted on June 4th, that is tomorrow. This mammoth exercise in democracy is said to be the biggest the world has ever seen. On behalf of Data Leads, I extend a warm welcome to all of you all. Um, Data Leads is a globally recognized New Delhi-based award-winning digital media and tech company with a worldwide focus on information ecosystem, data research, media literacy, fact-checking, health literacy, infodemic management, and digital transformation. But before we start today's discussion, I take this moment to hear from all of you all. We have a quick poll, and I invite you all to participate. You can see the poll questions popping up on your screen any minute. And I invite you all to choose yes and no to pick your options. The first question: do you think that Indian elections have a significant impact on the global political landscape? And you can choose yes and no to answer your questions.
Shruti, can we see the poll? Yeah, it's coming. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yes. I hope everyone's able to see the poll question.
Yes, I think it's visible to me here. Yes.
Yes.
I can't see the question.
Sir, it must be popping up on the right bottom of your screen.
Yeah, on the chat box, actually.
Right.
I can see 20 people have voted. And
Right. We've seen 23 votes. The question is, do you think that Indian elections have a significant impact on the global political landscape? Okay, I'll go to the next question. Will the geopolitical landscape be significantly different if the party in power changes? Please cast your vote in yes and no. I can see about 33 people participating. Okay, I'll move on to the third question. Is India an important contributor to how the global economy is being reshaped? I can see 32 votes. Okay, I'll move on to the fourth question. Will the Indian elections have a significant impact on the relationship shared by India with China? For those of you who've joined us now, we are running a quick poll before we dive into the discussion. Please feel free to participate in it. You can see the questions popping up at the right bottom of your screen. I'll move to the fifth question. Should India undertake more initiatives to strengthen regional security? I can see about 27 people on the fifth question. I move on to the sixth question. Are Indian elections seen as an established democratic practice by the global media? I can see about 25 of you voting. And the final question, do you see Prime Minister Narendra Modi winning a third consecutive term in power? We'll take 2-3 minutes for everyone who's joined us now. Please feel free to participate in the poll that's going on the right-hand side of the screen. I can see about 42 of you participating. Thank you so much. Perfect. I think we can end the poll now. Thank you so much for participating, guys. I now take the moment to introduce our esteemed panel members for today's discussion. Our first speaker, Dr. S.Y. Qureshi, has served as the Chief Election Commissioner of India and has introduced a number of electoral reforms, including establishing an expenditure control division and a voter education division in the Commission. Dr. Qureshi has held strategic and key positions in the Government of India. His recent book is on India's experiment with democracy. Welcome aboard, sir. Our second speaker is Dr. Lachlan Strahan. During a 30-year-old diplomatic career, Dr. Strahan served in Australia's missions in Bonn, Seoul, New Delhi, Geneva, Honiara. Dr. Strahan is a strategic thinker and a leading voice for India's Australia relationships. He is an award-winning author of the book Australia-China, which highlights Australia-China relations. Welcome aboard, Dr. Strahan. Our third speaker, Dr. Amitabh Mantu, is the chair of Center of International Politics, Organization and Disarmament Studies at JNU. He has been a member of the advisory board of India's National Security Council. He is one of India's leading thinkers and writers on international relations. Welcome aboard, Dr. Mantu. Our fourth speaker, Mr. Michael Kugelman, is the director at South Asia Institute. He specializes in US policy in South Asia, especially Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. His recent research project focused on great power competition in South Asia and US-India tech relations. Welcome aboard, Dr. Kugelman. Our fifth speaker, Celia Pasilana, is the country director at International Foundation for Electoral Systems, Sri Lanka. She brings over 20 years of international experience in leadership and technical roles in democratic governance, political transitions, electoral assistance, and capacity building. Welcome aboard, Ms. Pasilana. Our sixth speaker, Sunaina Kumar, is the Senior Fellow at Observer Research Foundation. Sunaina is a journalist and researcher. Her work at ORF focuses on gender and development. She has served as the Executive Director at Think 20, India Secretariat under India's G20 presidency. Our moderator for today, Mr. Syed Nazakat, is the founder and CEO at Data Leaks. Over to you, Mr. Nazakat.
Hi, Shruti. Thank you so much for the kind introduction of the whole panel. And what an honor and pleasure for us at Data Leaks to host all these distinguished speakers for this really, really important discussion. We were thinking whether we should really do it tonight because the curiosity, as Shruti said, is really there for this election. Because these elections are not just elections for Indians. These elections are also globally, significantly, very, very important. The direction India will take in next 5-10 years, what it really means for global peace and security, what it means for the dynamics of the global order. I think that's why these elections globally have been seen fundamentally important, how India builds its relationship with the rest of the world and how the rest of the world will build relationship with India with the new leadership in India. I think massive exercise as well, given the way the different phases of elections, the way the Indian elections were covered globally by global press, the coverage, the issues during this election. Somewhere down the line, the foreign policy didn't really dominate it, which like any other national election in any country. But I think it is going to fundamentally help strengthen, change the nature of India, how it responds to the world. So I think what I will keep it in mind in for next 50 minutes or an hour, we will have a format where I can request the speakers to make opening remarks, and then we will come back and have a conversation on a couple of important topics. What does it mean for the rest of the world? What Indian election really mean for the world? Let me start with Dr. S.Y. Qureshi, someone who has been in the middle of elections, has helped to conduct election, has supervised election processes in India. Dr. Qureshi, if I go with you first, how do you see the elections happening in India and what it really means for the rest of the world? You're in London, you're observing it from a distance today, you have an advantage of that distance as well. So how do you see the significance of Indian election? Just wondering whether Dr. Qureshi is with us. He's with us. I think he's just...
Dr. Qureshi, if you can switch on your audio, please. We can see you here.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know what name and the picture is appearing on the screen. If it is
Sim-
Ila Sharma, so it says two things. Number one, Ila Sharma is happens to be my wife. She was election commissioner of Nepal. That is incidental, but she would have this much influence on me that even she will change my face on the screen. I didn't realize. Or is it the power of Sayyid Nazaka that he can change the gender and sex of his people? So we have to be suitably scared of him. But I don't know what picture you are seeing on the screen and what name. I'm Asfai Qureshi and I'm Mustashed. Right. So this, of course, is the India's election is always the biggest election in history. From 1951, 1951 election was the biggest election in world history, and every election has been the biggest election. It's only getting bigger. Now it is like 90 countries going to poll at the same time, which means entire Europe, 50 countries of Europe, entire North America, Canada, all these together, and the complexities of 90 countries we find in India. So conducting elections is a bit of a difficult job. It's not only the biggest election, but it's also the biggest management event of any kind, and I'm proud to have headed this organization once upon a time, and it is highly regarded. It is highly respected. We had set up in during my tenure in 2011 an institute called India International Institute of Democracy and Election Management, basically to train our 12 million people, government staff who will conduct the election, and a zero error election at that. That is the time when we took the decision that we'll throw it open to other election commissions of the world. And I'm very happy to tell you that by now, 108 countries, commissioners, and the top management has trained from us. So therefore, India's election is watched by so many people, and the credibility of India's election commission is extremely high. Hillary Clinton once described India's election as gold standard. We election commission is described as world guru. But this time around, I'm very sorry to see that lots of questions were raised about the role of the election commission and its independence. I wish it had not happened, because considering that we are not only the largest democracy, we are also the most populous country, and the world looks at us and we can influence the world, which is the basic question. Surely, if India's elections have an impact on many parts of the world, and although foreign policy, I think, is the last thing which is changed by any incoming government, but it's not that they cannot change it or change it radically. It has
Right.
happened, for instance, even in our neighborhood. SARC, for instance, has become redundant because the government did not made it redundant. So therefore, its implications are far and wide.
Thank you so much, Dr. Qureshi, for these opening remarks. If I request Professor Amitabh Matu, if you make your opening remarks on Indian election and what it means for the world.
Um, so sorry to intervene. I think I missed one of our speakers who's joined just now. Mr. Kugelman, are you around? And while I do this, I also request all our speakers to please switch on your cameras.
Thanks, Shruti. Dr. Amitabh Matu, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think, Mr. Nazakat, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm delighted to be in the distinguished company of a former Chief Election Commissioner, Qureshi Saab, who's now visible, clearly visible now. Mrs. Sharma's picture is no longer there on your screen, sir, so that is good news. But I think from the perspective of the world and what it means for the world, clearly the world has been watching our general elections much more intensely and much more closely now today than perhaps has been the case in the past. It's just the massiveness of the exercise and the manner in which Prime Minister Modi would, after Nehru, be the only Prime Minister who would potentially get a third term. But what does it mean in terms of foreign policy and international relations? Now, I have had the chance of actually speaking to a large number of people located in different capitals of the world, especially the P5 country or the G7 countries, and all of them basically try and divide how they see these elections. For majority of them, whether it's including, and like he is here and he'll talk about Australia, that if Prime Minister Modi and his government were to come to power tomorrow, as the exit polls predict, then this will be a statement of continuity. What that means is that there will be a certain predictability and a certain stability to India. And the greatest weight that they want to give as far as their relations with India are concerned, or what India's role in the international system is going to be, is stability, predictability, and a certain sense of continuity. Prime Minister Modi brings these three elements along with, and if you talk to the business part of the relationships, the multinational corporations and their leaders or the investment bankers, they say predictability is probably the strongest thing that they are looking for. A strong, stable regime which is predictable, whether it is in terms of tax policies or business friendliness. And they have found over the last 10 years, Prime Minister Modi's government, to a man or woman, business friendly, much more than ever has ever been the case in the past. Australia's example is a good example because Australian businesses have traditionally had very little patience with India. They came in, went back, Greenlays came in, Telstra came in, and then withdrew. But this time you can see that there is a recognition of the potential of India. Now, as far as the domestic politics go, the noise and chaos and the mess, I think the attention that they would focus on that would be about 10% in terms of the rest. The rest, in that, I also include the fact that they want to see a stable, strong India, which emerges as a balancer to a potentially hegemonic, imperialist, and potentially aggressive China. So if they want to invest in India's economic growth, its military growth, because China is a country which is it's not democratic, it's much less amenable to Western influence, for instance, and it is showing under Xi Jinping a dictatorial tendencies. As far as domestic politics and the divisiveness and the election campaign, I think that forms only a small lens through which they will approach India. I could be corrected, but no more than 10% on a scale of 100 or 90. For them, this is good news that there is continuity, strength, and stability in India if Mr. Modi and the NDA alliance that he leads is returned to power tomorrow.
Thanks a lot. Thank you so much for these opening remarks. Dr. Sran, how do you look at from Canberra and also Asia Pacific? Dr. Manto mentioned about China factors. So how do you see the overall interest about Indian elections and what it really means for the rest of the world or rest of Asia Pacific?
Okay, thanks very much. Look, I agree with some of the points which have been made so far, but I must say I also diverge. The first thing I would say is that the nature of Indian democracy, of course, is important for the world. As the former Chief Election Commissioner pointed out, it is the largest electoral process in the world. While I was in India, I was there for the national election in 2010, and it's magnificent to see India handling a vote across such a big and diverse country. But there are two things about Indian democracy which worry me. One is a long-term feature, and the other is a more recent one. The long-term feature is that for me, any first past the post voting system is fundamentally undemocratic, in that you will have the strong possibility that a party will get a minority of the vote, but a large majority of seats. Now, that happened in the last national election, where Mr. Modi got 37% of the vote, but 56% of the seats. From an Australian point of view, we have two different voting systems in our two houses of parliament, which make sure that that can't happen. The party that forms government must get more than 50% of the popular vote. The second thing that unnerves me is the clear tendency over the last couple of years for a series of, frankly, quite anti-democratic tactics, political tools to be used to reinforce the supremacy of Mr. Modi's party. To bring it to the foreign policy sphere, the Australia-India relationship is based upon what I'd say is 4 pillars. One is the economic complementarity, and Amitabh is quite right that part of our relationship is growing strongly. Very, very strong people-to-people links. We now have almost 1 million people who live in this country who have Indian ancestry. Those 2 things, I think, are in place and strong. But the 2 things which I think are being challenged, one is a 3rd pillar, which is shared values. And the last one is our geostrategic convergence. Yes, India can be a balancer against China. I would also hope against Russia, to be frank. So I think I sometimes find Russia as, if not more, threatening. But the thing about India being a balancer is, from the Australian point of view, it is the fact that a secular, liberal, inclusive India, a genuinely democratic India, has been a balancer. If those credentials are eroded, then its value as a balancer falls. So I think, yes, we would have continuity if Mr. Modi wins. To some extent, that gives us a good thing, predictability. But for me, it reinforces some trends which are grounds for concern.
Thank you so much for these opening remarks. And I quite found your point about electoral system. And I think that's a good point to discuss maybe in the second round with Dr. Qureshi as well. What are his views on that? So that's a very good point. And let me go to Michael. And Michael, you have been at the Wilson Center, keenly following South Asia and India for a long. How do you see it from a US perspective as well? The Indian elections, how was it covered as well in the American press, who have been a bit critical of the Prime Minister Modi?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I think answering your question broadly, this is an election that is clearly very important for the world in an era when smooth elections, procedurally speaking, can no longer be taken for granted. There have been a series of rigged elections with contested results in India's neighborhood, for sure, and beyond. And certainly in recent years, India has developed a reputation for hosting smooth elections, despite their massive size and duration. Irregularities have been irregular, in particular in relation to what's happened in its immediate neighbors, Bangladesh and Pakistan. But I agree with what Dr. Strahan just said before, that certainly, from my seat here in Washington, there are a lot of concerns about the broader state of play in India, democratically speaking, in terms of democracy. And I think it's important that the success stories in India around the procedural elements of elections should not take away from the importance of those growing concerns, those perceptions, should I say, here in Washington, and certainly in other Western capitals as well and beyond. Beyond that, I would just say that from a more geopolitical lens, this election matters for Washington and the world on the whole, because India matters for the world. Stating the obvious, but sometimes it's important to foot stomp the obvious. Whoever wins this election and leads India's next government will inherit a country that is the most populous in the world, that has the 5th largest economy, fastest growing major economy, 4th or 5th most powerful military, depending on what measure you use, one of the largest emerging tech sectors, and a country that's now, after its lunar landing last year, a formal space power. So, it's a country that is a growing global actor. Some would say a power, and a country with which I'd say most governments around the world are keen to engage, no matter who wins the election and leads the government and leads the country. And I think that's a key consideration. I'll conclude here with some notable and obvious exceptions, which I imagine we'll talk about. There's multi-partisan, multi-ideological, multi-political system support around the world to engage with India. So there will clearly be, and clearly is, keen attention focused on who comes out on top, just because, again, the significant majority of the world's governments view India as a country with significant strategic or commercial significance, or both. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I will go quickly to Celia on essentially on elections, how they were conducted, and the process of Indian elections, which is globally recognized as one of the most strongest one. How do you see also how Indian elections are seen, given your experience working with the different stakeholders globally? What are your key takeaways when you look at from India from a distance currently from Sri Lanka?
Yes, thank you so much, Syed, and thanks to all those who spoke before me. I follow a lot of your work, so I'm probably the one who has least India experience on this panel, but yes, my perspective is more global, and as such, seeing the Indian election actually unfolding is really quite a sight to behold. I've never seen anything like it. I was fortunate enough to participate in the Indian election visitor program about a month ago. We witnessed the third phase of the election. I myself was in Maharashtra province, and yeah, it's really overwhelming in every sense of the word. What can I say? I was very struck by a couple of things. First of all, that I was very happy to see that the Indian Election Commission is going out of its way to ensure greater inclusion in elections. So for the first time, people who are over the age of 80 and persons with disabilities were able to vote from home. And I mean, there was a great effort to reach out to the young people and get them registered and these types of things. So those are very good kind of developments that are part of a bigger global trend of trying to liberalize voting arrangements and make it easier to vote. Because, you know, in many democracies around the world, we see turnout is going down, and it's really, really hard to keep the interest alive. Another thing that was quite interesting was the scale of voter education and just reaching out to voters. I was struck by all the selfie booths around, I mean, at polling stations, and, you know, the materials available in different languages. The sort of festive atmosphere was really fun. That's common in South Asia in general, which is really lovely to see. There were even ads on domestic flights. We took a domestic flight, Delhi to Mumbai, and they announced, you know, basically the election and the fact that people can get registered to vote, and this is what you do, and so on the airplane, which I have never heard before. So there were lots of really interesting things that we were able to see. And then the tremendous enthusiasm of many of the poll workers. They were very, very committed to the cause, at least the ones that I came across, and, you know, well trained and so on, and operating the electronic voting machines as well. It's, you know, there's a lot of different seals and processes that go into that. So it's technically quite, I wouldn't say it's difficult. The steps are simple, but there are many of them. So, you know, many interesting things that we saw. Of course, you know, I do share, you know, some of the sort of thoughts about, in general, first past the post that were brought up earlier. It's a difficult sort of system in many countries, not just India, but because of the way it can produce very disproportionate results. So that's something to consider. And yeah, so I think I'll leave it at that, and we can allow others to make their opening remarks. Thanks.
So then, very quickly to you then, and you at ORF, like you have been really being part of a lot of conversations, a lot of discussions about India's foreign policy, India's security, relationships in the region, and at G20, you know, the summit as well. How do you see that? What does this election really mean for our relationship with the rest of the world?
Good evening, and thank you, Nazakat. It's actually an honor to be here in this Power Pact panel. As I had told you, Nazakat, I'm currently at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. And when you invited me for the panel, I know that we already have Dr. Strahan here, and he, of course, has presented what the Indian election means for Australia. And that is also my point of view currently, because that is where I am based. I would just add a few things to what he had to say. And, you know, if we think of Australia, we think of the Indo-Pacific, and that pretty much is a defining idea of India's foreign policy, and also for so many countries in the world. And of course, this election matters very much. India is an important partner for Australia as a member of the Quad, with Japan, US, and Australia, also seen as a reliable partner and crucial for peace, security, and development of the Indo-Pacific. which is increasingly crucial for India's foreign policy and for Australia's foreign policy. I think one demographic which we should bring up, and of course it had briefly come up earlier, was the large Indian diaspora here in Australia. But we can think of that diaspora in every country of the world, and what does the election mean for them? I can say for Australia, but also for other countries, there has been an increased outreach by the Indian government, which has given the diaspora a sense of identity and connection with the homeland. Definitely something that was not as strongly defined as it has become in the last decade. So they are definitely watching this election. Most of the Indian diaspora of the world is extremely ambitious. It's aspirational. It's an asset for all countries of the world. In Australia, it is the second largest and also the fastest growing diaspora. And all of them also see themselves through a hyphenated identity of being Indian Australian or Indian American.
Right.
So I think that's an important group of people to talk about. I would say that as far as India Australia is concerned, the relationship, as Dr. Strahan said, is there are misgivings on shared values. There are some questions raised on that. But as far as shared interests are concerned, I think those have really come up and emerged as important in the bilateral.
Right.
For a relationship that was defined through 3 Cs, very overused tropes like cricket and Commonwealth and curry, the relationship now packs a punch. It has urgency, it has relevance. And of course, it is because of the new world order that this relationship has become so important. And the shared interests span regional security and defense ties, trade and investment, and of course, people to people ties. And all of those are only getting stronger.
Right, right. Thank you so much, Sunaina. Like, if I, we're hearing a lot of how different governments globally will engage with India, no matter who, like how the results are tomorrow. Actually, I will come to Professor Amitabh Mathur on South Asian politics, particularly. What really, how do you see the outcome of these elections? How will that kind of change our engagement with our neighbors in South Asia?
I mean, there's a hope and there is a reality. The hope is that that there is a much greater engagement in terms of integrating our neighbors within the large Indian economic framework. And some of that has happened, which is in Bangladesh, to extent with Sri Lanka. But then relations with Pakistan, most notably, but with Maldives and Nepal, have really had many irritants over the last 5 or decade, really. India's focus has really been, although Prime Minister Modi talked about neighborhood first, really it has been the international system and the great powers first. He made the initial gestures towards reaching out to Pakistan. As you remember, he visited Pakistan en route on the way back from Kabul for then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's granddaughter's wedding. And then there was a terrorist attack in Pathankot, and thereafter there has been complete suspension. After 370 was abrogated, Pakistan withdrew its high commissioner, so we don't even have high commissioners in Islamabad or New Delhi. Now, Nawaz is the power behind the throne in Islamabad, and the army seems to be so preoccupied with its domestic concerns that they have indicated that they might not be unwilling to find a new balance with India. Prime Minister Modi, during his many conversations that he had with TV anchors, suggested that really he does not have the bandwidth to deal with the Pakistan, which has the sense of entitlement and victimhood, and that let Pakistan deal with its own problems. I hope and pray really that will change, that there might be a modus vivendi found with Nawaz Sharif, or the Sharifs, as it were, and the army, in a manner in which there is a new stability to India-Pakistan relations. And Pakistan needs India desperately for the kind of economic condition that abyss that it's landed itself into. So I hope on that track there is. Similarly, I hope that there's greater engagement in Afghanistan, because in terms of people-to-people relations in Afghanistan, Afghans have wanted to travel to India to get medical treatment, for scholarships, etc. That has been suspended, but there's an opening there. With Maldives, I think the Maldives will realize its own lessons. It will realize that you cannot disconnect with your most immediate neighbor, India, in a manner that this regime seems to have done. Today, they have decided to ban even tourists from Israel visiting Maldives. Short-sighted measures, not realizing in this globalized world, no matter how offensive a regime might seem to you, these are not ways in which you deal with the world, with the international system. I hope in Bangladesh there is a more vibrant democracy. Sheikh Hasina realizes that there is a point after all of having stronger democracy. And Nepal, with whom we share so much, also stops playing footsie with China while trying to talk to India. I think it requires a sustained attention. It requires the political will. It requires the leadership. And frankly speaking, only Prime Minister Modi has today the heft to be able to deal with these problems. If he decides to send a message to South Asia, it could transform South Asia.
Right. It seems like we need to do a lot of work to improve our relationship with our immediate neighbors. And I will come back to Michael on a question in South Asia. I know because he has been following the things very closely, but I will quickly go to Dr. Qureshi first. Dr. How do you see, like on South Asia particularly, how do you see the government in power in Delhi? And are we going to have a better relationship with these couple of neighbors, including like what's happening with Maldives and then Nepal, a little bit friction out still there? And then, of course, our South Asia bigger neighbor, the Pakistan on the other side.
Yeah, in fact, as was mentioned, I think by Professor Mattu, that neighborhood first policy of Mr. Modi mentioned in the beginning certainly hasn't seen the light of the day, because we have sometimes a paradoxical situation there. Bangladesh is an irritant in India. Bangladeshi infiltration, migration is even one of the pole issues. At the same time, our government relations with Bangladesh are excellent. And he had only 6 months ago, I had a long meeting with Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. She is very matured. She is very, very pro-India, and it is great that she is pro-India, because otherwise Bangladesh could have become the hub of terrorists. But she has made sure that that doesn't happen. In fact, although while on the subject, I may mention something in light of which is what she said, that the USA was interfering and pressurizing her to have good relations with the main opposition leader, Khalida Zia. She says, I'll be happy to do this the day I see Biden shaking hands with Trump. So now they can't have a good relation with their opposition, and they expect, and they're preaching to the Khalida to have that kind of relationship, on which basis they were going to have their position vis-a-vis the Bangladesh election. I was also a chief election observer in Maldives last month. And I found the people of Maldives are very, very pro-India, as they should be. But they voted overwhelmingly for the president. And I was told that is because that's a non-natural tendency, that they want to be on the right side of the president. I got the feeling that the president also himself is realizing the mistake, that the China is not the fair weather friend, because they make you a captive by giving you a grant, and Sri Lanka was one example. And here India again provided a contrast. The way we helped out Sri Lanka with so much of grace, so much of generosity, no publicity, no talking about it. So the fact that with some of our neighbors we have excellent relations, with others, and what is one of the biggest surprises is the only Hindu kingdom in the world is hostile to India. So why can't we keep them on the right side? So I don't think we have handled our neighbors very well or equitably, and even keeping Pakistan out. Now, as was mentioned by Professor Mattu, Prime Minister made a brilliant gesture of landing up without invitation at the wedding of granddaughter of Nawaz Sharif. But since terrorists sabotaged it, so who is calling the shots? The terrorists? Or who's setting the agenda? The Modi and Nawaz Sharif or the terrorists? It was very wrong reaction on the part of India. Because of the terrorist invasion to cut off all relations with Pakistan, I think it was wrong, and we had a great opportunity. When Pakistan was in a deep economic crisis like Sri Lanka, we had a great opportunity to bail them out, and they would have been grateful.
Thank you. And Michael, you want to chip in, given your extensive work in South Asia, how do you see the dynamics in South Asia, particularly after June 4, when the new government takes over the reins here?
Well, thank you. I think that the Modi government over the last decade has really done a number of things to strengthen ties with the immediate neighborhood, particularly looking at how it has been able to a degree, energize BIMSTEC, which of course is the other regional organization in South Asia. It excludes Pakistan and Afghanistan, but it has the other SARC members plus Thailand and Myanmar. And we've seen some movement to develop some connectivity projects, particularly this new electricity sharing initiative between Nepal and Bangladesh. So this has helped strengthen India's relations with its neighbors. But I would argue that there are three challenges that that Modi, especially Modi, and whoever wins the election, but it's challenges that especially Modi would face in South Asia. Very briefly, one, this is longstanding. You have an inherent fragility in the geopolitics of South Asia due to the power asymmetries at play. India is so much larger and more populous than any other South Asian country. And I think that has fueled certain anxieties and concerns among many countries in the region, not just Pakistan, about India's policies and actions, fueling perceptions that India sometimes acts as a regional hegemon or a bully. And I think that for those that have that type of perception in the region, the way in which Modi has pursued his policies, his foreign policies, very assertively, some would argue aggressively, I think would play into those perceptions. So that would be something significant, a significant challenge. Secondly, I would argue that the Indian government's policies over the last decade, and particularly over the last few years, have increased anti-India sentiment within some portions of the publics in Muslim majority countries in South Asia. In Bangladesh, certainly we've seen this. Pakistan, of course, that's not a surprise, and indeed the Maldives. And this has had different consequences. We've already heard about Maldives. In Maldives, of course, we have a president who essentially ran a presidential campaign around an anti-India trend, which is so remarkable and I think quite concerning for Indian foreign policy. In Bangladesh, I would argue that the rising anti-India sentiment within the public has not at all impacted India's diplomatic relations with Bangladesh, given the strong the strong relations, and I would argue the strong ideological convergences between Modi and Sheikh Hasina. But I do think that from a public diplomacy standpoint, this would be a challenge for the next Indian government, and especially if Modi continues to lead it. And finally, we've already hit on this, China's growing role in South Asia. I mean, it's undeniable. The footprint, just how much its footprint has deepened over the last few years. This is something that I think would constitute one of the biggest and perhaps most immediate foreign policy priorities for a return of Modi, really for any Indian government, whoever leads it.
Right. Thank you so much. I can also make a request here. If anybody has any question, you can keep on chat. I'm looking at it, and I will try to pick these questions later in the session. But I want to request the panelists, in case you want to make a counter argument, you can raise a hand. I will come back to you. But coming back on China question, I think that's, Michael, thanks for raising that, actually. I think that's a big question for Indian foreign policy, actually. The way we will raise in next 5-10 years, what it really means for our relationship with China. So I will request Dr. Strahan, if you chip in with your insight. We understand Australia's relationship with China as well as rape, predominantly featured in discussions globally, and how Asia Pacific can deal with the rising China, and how we can build relationships. And India has a diplomatic strong kind of a good somehow a strong commitment to have a peace at the borders. But despite of that, last couple of years, we have seen at the border, we had bad situations. And how do you really see at a larger global perspective, India-China relationship emerging in next 5-10 years?
Well, what I would say about, firstly, the relationship between Australia and China, just to give you a little bit of a backdrop there, we went through a very difficult period, 5 or 6 years, where we pushed back against Chinese interference in our domestic political system. We pushed back against Chinese espionage, Chinese cyber interference. So from the Australian point of view, what we had to do was stabilize that relationship. And I think now we have a China relationship which has got more evenness again, but the big questions have not gone away. And they all relate to, where does Xi Jinping see China and the world going forward? And he clearly has a much more assertive posture than previous Chinese leaders. And we see that, of course, most graphically in our own region in the South China Sea. But in my last job, where I was the High Commissioner in Solomon Islands, I could see there where China was pushing into another part of the world where traditionally they've not had a strong strategic presence. Now, look, there is an inherent tension between China and India. And with unresolved issues about the border, which are still with you, those tensions are not going to go away. One thing I must say I often found about some of my Indian friends, they would say Australia is in China's pocket because China is our biggest trading partner by a very, very big margin. But sometimes I must say I saw some of my Indian friends being unwilling to take a stronger stand against China in some public context. Now, I'm not saying this has to be confrontational. I would also see that in what is happening in different sphere with Russia and Ukraine. So what I would hope is that I'd see an India which at times would be prepared to take a stronger stand on issues like Russia and Ukraine, not to get into some kind of prolonged conflict, of course, with China, but be willing at critical junctures to draw some lines. Now, it's very true that the Quad is an important mechanism for a certain level of coordination, but I'll just finish on one point, which actually relates to South Asia. And for me, so long as India is governed by a Hindu nationalist party which is trying to marginalize its minorities, especially the 200 million Muslim Indians, that will create a problem for India in its immediate region and further afield. And for me, the unresolved questions in Kashmir, where I think the people of Kashmir have been held in limbo now for the best part of getting towards a decade. That is, relations with Pakistan cannot improve if somehow Kashmir is moved, in a cooperative direction where the people of Kashmir feel like their wishes are being listened to. But I also think Kashmir is almost an unsolvable problem.
Dr. Amitabh Bachchu, you want to reflect on that?
Sayyid Nazakat has prudently or asked me to tackle your provocative questions on Kashmir. Lucky. I mean, in fact, I found all the statements you made delightfully provocative. So let me address this in the order that I see you stated them. One, on China, I frankly feel exactly the same what Australians, not willing to stand up to China, including more recently talking about stabilizing relations with China under Penny Wong. The Indians have China as a neighbor who is invaded once, is now snapping at us all the time. So I don't know where you find these isolated Indians who think China is the China of Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai. Russia is a different kettle of fish. Russia stood with us for 75 years. It is the only P5 country, to get back to your Kashmir question, which recognizes Jammu and Kashmir as the complete Jammu and Kashmir as a complete part of India. It's the only P5 country still. There are interests in Russia, a long-standing ally who's not let you down, depending on how the mood swings or in Washington. Russia is absolutely different. It's not going to be a war on principles that we're going to fight on with Russia. It's a war based on practicality or interest. It's a recognition that Russia is an ally. So if you think that Indian foreign policy is based only on principles or should be based only on values, Lachlan, I must say that you've forgotten your years of training in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. But then, of course, as academics and outsiders, we have the luxury of preaching to the South blocks or the equivalents in Canberra. So, and on Muslims and India, frankly speaking, the only times, I mean, we've always had the Muslim population 15 to 20%, depending on how you see it. The relations with Pakistan have never improved to a degree that you could have a normalized relationship. In fact, the only breakthrough, just to be the devil's advocate, the only breakthrough came in Atal Bihari Vajpayee took a bus to Lahore, and that was a BJP government. You had Nehru, you had Indira Gandhi, the most liberal prime ministers, Congress prime minister. You had Gujral, who believed that the whole plank of his foreign policy should be to reach out to neighbors, who reached out to Mian Nawaz Sharif. And Nawaz Sharif, Gujral used to say that Nawaz Sharif told him, look, I know you can't give me Kashmir, and I know I can't take Kashmir from you, but let's keep speaking. Now you have the good fortune of having two Kashmiris, one as the chief chair of our panel and me as a Kashmir there. So I don't think it's fair to inflict more Kashmir on this panel or on you. So I'll stop there.
I see. I also see questions here, and we have 15 more minutes to sum up the discussion. But I really want to take a moment, maybe a back seat here, to celebrate the whole electoral process as well, because it's as Dr. Qureshi rightly said, is the whole exercise of conducting the elections. But very briefly, maybe if I can ask, how do we? I know like Celia and Qureshi had a deep insight about the election processes, but maybe with Sunana very quickly, perhaps, like. How is India so good at conducting elections, actually?
I think India taps into what is one of its greatest governance strengths, which is mobilizing people. Whether, as they always say for India, that when it comes to what other countries are able to deliver more easily, which is health and education, those are things that where we find a lot of gaps. But election, mass vaccination, anything that involves mobilizing huge numbers of people, we're able to do that. I think it's also very interesting that since this is a foreign policy conversation, this is exactly what we did with our G20 presidency last year. No other country has turned G20 into almost a public festival, and we did. And it does, this is something that we are able to tap into culturally, of course. And we already have Dr. Qureshi here to talk about the institutional strengths. And I will not go into that because we have an expert. So my answer to you would be more in terms of, in public policy, what are our strengths? And I think the election is just one of those core strengths of India.
Right. Thank you so much. Actually, if we come back to you very quickly, how do you, before I go to Dr. Qureshi on elections, looking at Indian elections, how do you see the role of technology? How is technology changing how elections are conducted? And it will be AI. How do you see discussion happening?
I'm so sorry, I lost your voice there, Nazakat, for a minute.
I think for a minute.
Not sure if it's my network.
I think what Mr. Nazakat was asking, the role of technology in these elections, if I may paraphrase him.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
Well, actually, I'm going to lob that question.
Yes. I'm asking that question to say. And I go to Qureshi Saab.
Yes. Celia, it's for you.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure who this question was for. Excuse me, I'm also having audio problems. I couldn't quite hear, but I understand it was about technology. And indeed, so India is one of the few countries that makes use of voting technology. So usually a lot of countries do have they adopt technological measures to deal with both the front end and the back end. So voter registration and then results tabulation, but actually not that many countries use voting technology because mainly because of perceptions that it could be manipulated. That technology. But that notwithstanding, obviously in India, the system that exists is there perhaps by greater necessity than in any other country, just because of the sheer volume. So you have much more of an imperative to use machines just to get through the process in a reasonable period of time. And indeed, any delays in counting of votes, for example, usually lead to suspicions of wrongdoing. So getting results quickly is a very important goal. Now the Indian election or electronic voting machines are accompanied by a VVPAT, which is the voter verified paper audit trail. So essentially every vote that is cast also has a verifiable paper audit trail that can be examined later if there are any doubts about that machine. So, I mean, there's a lot of safeguards in place in India that at least I was able to witness. We were able to even do mock voting and stuff like that using the EVMs. And also, what's a really good practice, I think, is that in India you have like essentially a practice poll with the candidate agents before actual polling starts using those machines. So there's a couple of definitely very good practices in place. However, the greatest, as I said, I mean, the greatest issue with machines is that people are just naturally suspicious of them. So whether or not there's any wrongdoing actually, sometimes doesn't even matter, but people are suspicious of electoral technology in general. And it's very easy for those issues to start popping up when you have other credibility issues or when you have a lot of divisive politics or whatever the case may be. So I think I just want to highlight that it's a very challenging thing.
Right. And Dr. Qureshi, how is it like to be the chief election commissioner at the moment and day before the voting is counted? How was your experience, like as a chief election commissioner a day before the elections, and what really happens actually?
Well, our system is so decentralized that the three chief election commissioners will be sitting in the drawing rooms, or if it is in office time, in the office on a sofa with their legs stretched, watching the TV along with the whole nation. Because the action is in the field, all the power is with the returning officer. No one higher returning officer announces the results real time. You get to know, the people get to know first, and there is a lag of 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes for us to get to know. So therefore, this decentralization is an amazing feature of the electoral system, and it works so well. About 4,000, 5,000 counting centers, and every process there are rounds. 14 machines constitute one round. After every round, the result is announced, and the certificate taken from the party agents. Okay, look, this round went off fine. So after 20 rounds, if somebody says, okay, look, election has been rigged after the 21st round, that is surely stupid. Because if the election whole day, round by round, has been going on fine and certified and made public, gone into the whole world to say that something has gone wrong. So we have enough checks. At the same time, it is difficult to stop people talking. As they say, that some people, Celia was saying that people suspect machines. That has been the case from the beginning. Every single party has challenged these machines at some point or the other. And the biggest challenger was the BJP itself in 2009, which is when I introduced VVPAT, because I called an all-party meeting. I said, what do you... And to my surprise, this delegation was led by Chandrababu Naidu, who was known as the CEO rather than the chief minister. he was a technology icon. I was surprised. I said, "Are you leading this anti-technology delegation?" My challenge is either you convince me or I convince you, and I will convince you and make you my brand ambassador for EVM. Now tell me what you want. He says that we are not saying that EVM can manipulate the result. It has done it in the past or it will do it in the future. All we are saying that it doesn't have transparency. I said, what is the solution? Is the VVPAT, voter verifiable paper audit trail. Believe me, we decided about the VVPAT in the same meeting with the political parties. Well, because
So
it was a reasonable request.
Qureshi Sab, you're saying the EVMs as of now, as they stand, are absolutely foolproof?
Foolproof. I have been certifying it in every media interaction in the last 3 months, more than the election commission itself. And
Mhm.
perhaps my certification carries more credibility because I have no stake. I'm a retired man.
Okay, thank you for that observation. I think there are a couple of questions here. I will try to maybe take one of them at the first. We have 10 more minutes, but I don't know, Michael, if you want to make any observation, you have been listening. I think we're looking at U.S. relationship as well. You're also heading to elections, and it's quite interesting in the developments there in that country as well. If you want to make a one observation on that, and then I will come back with questions.
Thanks. Yeah, you're right. I guess I didn't say anything about the U.S. yet. Well, I mean, I had said before that broadly speaking, there's a pretty strong desire to want to engage with India, regardless of what the government will look like, and that certainly is true in the U.S. I mean, we've seen as the relationship has reached unprecedented levels over the last few years that within a very polarized polity here in the U.S., here in Washington, there's strong levels of support among Republicans and Democrats and their leaderships to engage India. But I think looking to this election and the outcome of it, I do think that if Modi, as expected, comes back, I think that will sharpen what has become a bit of a conundrum, or not a conundrum, but a challenge for U.S. policymakers, and that is how to essentially balance two competing issues. One being the strategic imperatives of partnership with India for reasons that we all know, with the increasing concerns about what's happening internally in India. And I would argue here that you had a major game-changing moment when that indictment was unsealed in New York last year, detailing a lot of details about an alleged Indian government role in a case of transnational repression. So I think that for many policymakers in Washington, the relationship with India continues to be critical. But if Modi comes back, then I think that that somewhat uncomfortable reality of knowing that you need to engage with the key strategic partner, but this being a strategic partner that might well have carried out an extrajudicial killing on your soil. So that will be a concern, but I wouldn't overstate that. And of course, as we all know, the U.S. has its own election later this year, in this year of elections. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but if we have a change of party here, and if the Republicans come back, if Donald Trump returns to the presidency, I don't necessarily think that would make much of a difference in terms of how the U.S. looks at the relationship with India, and India with a Modi coming back for a third term. Again, emphasizing what I said about multi-partisan views, multi-partisan unity, consensus around the need to engage with India. But given some of these recent developments, including the case of this alleged case of transnational repression in the U.S., a Trump administration might go about that a bit differently than a Biden administration has. But I don't want to get ahead of myself with speculation because we're still months away from the election here.
I saw Dr. Strawn raising hand, but I just quickly, do you see Trump coming back in the U.S.?
Oh, that's directed to me. I don't have a mandate to discuss domestic politics, so I'll pass on that. But my bottom line there is that if he does come back, and I said this when he won the first time, foreign policy is an increasingly polarizing issue in the U.S. But I do think when it comes to relations with India, that there's a fair amount of convergence. So I wouldn't overstate the impact that his return would have on U.S. relations with India.
Dr. Strawn.
I would say that whoever wins the Indian election, India will remain one of our most important partners. There's been a structural change in the nature of the relationship between the two countries. Go back 20 years ago, we were like two ships passing in the night. Those fundamentals are now they're embedded. But I would also just note that we've had our own brush with a more intrusive and assertive nationalist India. And we had a bit of a scandal a couple of years ago here about a nest of spies who were expelled. There was a lot of debate about who were these spies. Were they Russians? Were they Chinese? Well, we've found out, in fact, sadly, they were Indian spies who were expelled. And from the Australian point of view, that was quite unnerving. We had not expected that from such a major and friendly partner. Now, that's not going to change the nature of the relationship. It does, again, for me, raise that question mark. In a world where we have the rise of divisive populism, and Donald Trump would be another example of that, we need less of that, not more. And I would just hope that we can somehow find our way through to greater inclusion rather than a form of politics which is exclusionary.
Professor Mattu,
Yeah, Nazakat, I have a question in the chat box and also a response to the question that you had about the United States. In my limited understanding of US foreign policy, I don't know of a single case since post-Second World War US history where they've actually worked against a regime, whether it's democratic or a dictatorship, as long as it served its interests, even if that is a despotic regime or it's the most open democracy. Jimmy Carter did business with Zia, and you couldn't have a more despotic leader than Zia, and you couldn't have a more liberal beacon of all the kind of individual human values in American presidential history than Jimmy Carter. So yes, I think the State Department might use this as a leverage. This is never going to be a make and break. What India does domestically is not going to be the reason why the United States may decide on a certain course of policy towards India. And about Trump, Arvind Kejriwal has set a good example by sitting in Tihar and sort of governing Delhi from Tihar. So Trump could be in jail and governing America from inside jail. So here is another example that we can offer to America. That's happened in the past, so maybe it'll happen in America now. Delhi kind of maximized there. But the question about what does Modi 3.0 mean to Muslims in India, Pakistan, and China, I think that telegraphically, I hope and believe and pray that Muslims in India will feel more empowered, and that there will be policies to ensure that there is a sense of empowerment and mainstreaming of Muslims who have felt excluded. I believe that Modi in 3.0, where in some ways there is also a legacy that he wants to leave behind, will do that to mainstream Muslims in India. And I just hope that Jammu and Kashmir is part of that and process. Pakistan, I do not see a breakthrough with China. I can't see relationships getting better. Pakistan, it will require a real change in mindsets within Pakistan and also now within India. China, the relationship is going to get even more tense. So I hope, Islam Mufti, I have answered your questions. I hope I have not kind of evaded those questions, but this is the best answer that I can give you.
Thanks a lot. And Michael, please.
Thanks. Just a very brief response to the first thing that Dr. Mattu said before about the U.S. and India. I fully agree that the U.S. is perfectly comfortable working with authoritarian states or with states given to authoritarian tendencies, and plenty of evidence of that. Or Latin American dictatorships during the Cold War, and so on and so forth. But and the Saudis and so many others today. But my point was, I think that the U.S. you have to make a distinction between the idea of India as a country that is showing indications of descending into a liberalism. That is something that the U.S. government can accept, and there's multi-partisan support for the idea that, okay, there's that, but we still want to engage with it. distinguish between that and cases of transnational repression that actually play out on U.S. soil, right? Because my understanding of how U.S. policymakers are looking at India, and this will become all the more relevant if Modi comes back, so long as you have these, again, from a U.S. perspective, so long as you have these concerning developments playing out internally in India, it's not something that's going to impact U.S. interests at the end of the day, because it's playing out in India with no direct impacts for the U.S. and its interests. But if some of these patterns and developments playing out in India are now playing out beyond India, including on U.S. soil, this is where I think that U.S. policymakers get a bit more concerned, and I think particularly those that work on the more sensitive sides of the relationship, those on the intel and the security side. Intelligence cooperation is a big part of the U.S.-India relationship now. I think for them, it's the perceptions that they might have about India and working with India might change just a bit. So I just wanted to make that distinction. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Very quick to Dr. Qureshi. There was a question from Arvind Kumar. I request others as well for the benefit of to saving the time, just put it in a chat box and I would pick it from there. There's a question from Arvind Kumar about Dr. Strand's point about concern on a party securing merely 36% popular vote, but securing 36% of seats. So, Dr. Qureshi, do you want to elaborate, throw a light on that?
Sure. I'm glad he raised it, because this was a point which was made earlier by one of the speakers, and I noted it, but and I would have talked about it. I was initially a supporter of the first past the post system. In fact, when my first book in 2012, I described all the systems, and I supported this. My book was called An Undocumented Wonder, The Making of the Great Indian Election. But after the election was over, in my third edition of the same book, I changed my position. And why? Based on fact. It's not that I'm fickle-minded, because what happened was in UP, BSP got 20% vote share and 0 seat. Now, this I thought was a grave aberration. 20% people voting for a party and getting 0 seat in parliament. So this is not representative democracy. Ever since then, I have been arguing that we should have a mixed system borrowed from Germany, which had been followed by Sri Lanka and Nepal. And today I heard that Australia also has that kind of a mixed system. There needs to be a very serious debate, and very urgently, because first part of the post system, and we borrowed it from UK, mind you, and they themselves had a referendum on it 9 years ago, which was a half-hearted referendum. Nobody knew what was it about. Very low, there was very low turnout, so it failed. But it doesn't mean that the question is dead. In UK, it is being discussed, but in India, we need to discuss it more urgently, because the earlier system has actually failed us.
Thank you so much. And there's one more question from Roxana to Celia, to you, on what Modi's win could mean for Sri Lanka and the minorities in Sri Lanka. If you answer that one quickly.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm not a political commentator really as such. I'm more of an elections person and a technical person. But of course, being in Sri Lanka, I've now been here for 5 years. And I came right before the last presidential election. So India looms very large. Like somebody said in the beginning, I think maybe it was Dr. Qureshi or Dr. Mathu, but that India bailed out Sri Lanka, obviously, during the crisis 2 years ago. And even without that kind of intervention, it's always the éminence grise behind a lot of political maneuvering. So not only have members of parliament, been going to India, but I mean, essentially the person who is currently or has been a front runner in the polls for a little while, who is comes from a party that does not historically have that kind of relationship with India. So clearly, this is. It seems to be very important to have the support of India for whoever wins the next presidential election in Sri Lanka. So it's always on the radar. And as we get closer to the elections, things will start popping up, lots of conspiracy theories and everything. It's going to be a very exciting time, but we're here to observe it all. In terms of minorities, sorry, if I could just add on the minority issue, it definitely plays into that as well. And the lack of provincial council elections also is very closely tied to the minority question and India's influence. And so, but that's a topic we could talk about another day. It's such a big one that best left for it.
One question in the chat here on my WhatsApp on Europe. We didn't really discuss Europe, India's relationship with Europe. Professor Amita, if you just give us a quick take on how do you see our relationship building with the European Union and European countries immediately after this? Do you see any change happening there? And given we have such a strong relationship with the European countries,
I think the problem is Ukraine and Russia, which Lachlan talked about. I think the Europeans are deeply concerned about Russian invasion and continued the war in Ukraine. However, if on the other hand, India is able to bring about a certain moderation in the behavior of Russia, as well as look at Ukraine outside the Suez process. At the moment, one of the things that is going to happen is this large Swiss government initiative, which is going to take place later this month to try and bring about some form of peace. But it excludes Russia. And China is actively campaigning against it, and India may not have a strong presence. So I don't think that Suez initiative will work out. I think an India-led initiative could potentially generate a breakthrough, and this could well be Modi's moment to reach out to a new kind of diplomacy, which we haven't witnessed in the past from the part of India, to try and settle and resolve issues which seem contentious.
Right, and there's a question. Thank you so much. There's a question from the audience from Sharad to Dr. Qureshi. What if there's a hung house? What happens? So it looks like exit polls are very clear what's going to happen here. But if there's a hung house, what will happen tomorrow? And your audio, Qureshi Saab, is unmuted.
Yeah, there is an established procedure. The president will call the leader of the party which gets the largest vote share, whatever be the largest, and will invite him and ask whether he can form the government and a stable government. So if the person says, okay, yes, I can form the government, she will say, okay, but you have to prove the majority in 2 to 3 weeks. Now, this is where the trouble begins. These 2 3 weeks will be the worst, because that will be weeks of horse trading. MPs will be bought and sold for 100 crores, 200 crores. There is no dearth of money with the person we discussed most today. There are deep pockets supporting him. So that will be a very dirty and ugly period if that happens, and I hope it doesn't. So whosoever comes to power comes with clear majority, because hung house and horse trading are the bane of India's election.
And last one, question for all the speakers, very briefly, maybe in a very short one sentence. If I may ask, what has been your major takeaways from Indian election? In whatever way you see it, I may start with maybe, Michael, with you. What has been your one takeaway from Indian election?
Well, it's hard to identify just one. For me, it really comes down to Modi. I mean, he has been, in my view, the major, and if not dominant, political story in India over the last decade. And I think what this election is about, among many other things, is seeing whether he is able to achieve the level of success that I believe only Nehru is affected beside him. I mean, in that ability to win a third term and serve for what would be another 5 years, 15 years. I think for me, that's, and he has become such a big part of politics, and also including electoral politics. He is someone that campaigns on behalf of other candidates because he has that level of popularity and charisma. So I think for me, seeing if he's able to get that result that he wants, that would put him in that very rare echelon of Indian political figures. Love him or hate him, I think one has to acknowledge that he is such a dominant factor in consideration in Indian politics today. And I think that's what the election is about at the end of the day.
Thanks. So Naina, what do you think major takeaway from you from this election?
Since Modi has been covered by Michael, I think I will just put at the forefront the Indian voter, who is very diverse, very vociferous, very aware. And the next government that comes in is going to be problem solving for the world's largest population, a hugely aspirational population, so we cannot be losing time. And most of all, what India needs to do is meet our own developmental goals and focus on enhancing our human capital.
Right. Dr. Strahan, what was your takeaway?
I would have to come back to Modi and what kind of country India becomes if he wins a third term with a bigger majority. I do not think that would be a good thing for Indian pluralism, Indian federalism, Indian inclusion. So I would hope that we get a result which acts as a brake on what I see as his authoritarian, anti-democratic tendencies, which are eating away at the character of India. And I don't think that's a good thing for India, and I don't think it's a good thing for the world.
Right. Celia, how do you see one major takeaway for you?
For me, it's about combating apathy, voter apathy. I think there was a question about that as well. We need to make sure turnout remains high and that people are engaged in the democratic process and also understand democratic values and principles and uphold those, because otherwise an election commission has a pretty impossible job to do. So it's really very important that everybody be engaged and take democracy seriously, because it doesn't come for free.
Qureshi Saab, what is your takeaway from the elections? Qureshi Saab, speaker.
Yeah, Indian Election Commission has acquired a great international reputation, and it must guard it to its last drop of blood. Unfortunately, for the first time, the questions have been raised. Actually, not for the first time. In 2019, this thing began, and we have gone from bad to worse. Even-handedness was the hallmark of every decision of election system. Now people are violating. Hate speech was rampant, which will send leader to jail for 90 years, as somebody was calculating. So, but no notice was given. And in fact, some innovative way, the notice was given not to the person who made the hate speech, but to his party president, and to balance it to another party. Now, what about so many other candidates to whom the notice was given? They will say, look, don't send me notice, send notice to my party leader. No, they try to be a little smart and clever. It doesn't work. People see, and I'm glad that my Australian colleague has actually summed it up for all of us. Because if we do well, everybody sees that. If we do badly, people are not blind. And I finish on this last sentence. Reputations like buildings take years to build and seconds to demolish. We have seen that happening. So we have to guard it. The people,
Right.
the party, the media, and everyone, that our reputation should not go for a 6.
Right. Thank you so much. And Professor Amitabh Mattu, final word to you, actually.
Thank you very much. I think it never ceases to overwhelm me. The whole spectacle of Indian elections, the manner in which you have a scale, an event or a process of this size managed relatively peacefully, without much angst and anger. Of course, as Qureshi Saab pointed out wisely and sagely, that there have been instances where the reputation of the Election Commission has been slightly eroded. But just the fact that you have a periodic multi-party elections which opens up the possibilities of a transfer of power every 5 years. And every time, right from 1947, there have been those people Cassandras, who've been saying India is teetering on the brink of disaster, that dictatorship is just about to take over. India cannot survive. It's too diverse, so poor that as a democracy it cannot survive, except for 19 months of emergency. At least in its formal sense, democracy and multi-party elections have always been held on time. That, for me, is the greatest source of strength. But for the price of that liberty, we have to be constantly vigilant.
Thank you so much for really joining. I know it has been at different time zones in different places, and we had the panelists, really making sure that we have a really thoughtful conversation. Everybody spoke, everybody made his points. I think we have a big day tomorrow. I think it's going to be really a celebration of our rise of participating in democracy and India's story eventually, how we will engage with with the rest of the world as well. I think thank you so much for joining today. And Shruti, if has a final thoughts on anything.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to this really insightful chat. I thank our esteemed panel members for bringing in their valuable experiences to this conversation. At Data Leads, we'll continue to bring you such relevant conversations. So please do continue to follow our work. And on that note, thank you so much, and see you all on the emails very soon. Thank you so much.